welcome to Statues and Monuments. And in today's programme,
some extraordinary stories. Londoners salute the man of the century. The secret of eternal youth. And a Russian hellraiser who sailed up the Thames to Deptford.
history is all around us. It is us, the landscape of London, a reminder of who we are. The statues and monuments scattered throughout our great city, the heritage of who we are. You find them in grand places like this, and on ordinary street corners, and on traffic islands marooned by snarls of cars, in churchyards.
Here's Thomas More, the utopian, who faced the wrath of King Henry VIII, lost his head for it. Tall statues, like Nelson's column, and Cleopatra's needle. Men died bringing this to our shores. And tallest of all, the monument to the Great Fire of 1666, which raged for 4 whole days. Elegant and exquisite ones, classical statues like Boadicea, what a leader she. Modern and bizarre statues. I'm not keen on this to Oscar Wilde, but it's good he's got one. Kings and queens galore. 9 statues to Edward VII, 7 to Victoria.
And this one to the Queen Vic in Kensington was sculpted by Queen Victoria's own daughter, Princess Louise. Of mum, to mum, with love from your own daughter.
And the oldest outdoor statue in London, this one, in Trinity Church Square, dates back to 1395. It's thought to be Alfred the Great, the one who supposedly burnt his cakes, King of Wessex before there was an England. There are some massive statues, like the colossal 33-ton Achilles, erected in 1822 in Hyde Park. It cost £10,000, paid for by the women of England to commemorate Wellington. But when it was unveiled, the women were shocked by its nakedness. London's first nude statue. So many statues with extraordinary stories. And we've all got favourites.
My favourite statue? Oh, Dr. Johnson in the Aldwych, Samuel Johnson. He was a provincial like me, came to London and loved it. Sat in the pub arguing the toss. It's still a lovely way to spend a day. And this one of the politician Fenner Brockway in Red Lion Square, because he would be out come rain or shine, spouting for the good cause. He never hid his belief beneath some spin doctor, but he was there, the pamphlets in his hand, out, up front, and that's for me the spirit of London. So why do statues get put up? I'll be delving into that during the series. The reasons why, the complexities of erecting a statue. I'll be meeting the people responsible for putting them up. So we're in for a journey to find the reasons behind the monument. You don't have to like or agree with the sentiments behind the statues. It's history. "300 years ago, by invitation of King William III, King Billy, the Tsar of Russia, Peter, came to England. By royal invitation, he sailed across the sea, up the Thames, to the Royal Naval Dockyard, then at Deptford, not a stone's throw from Greenwich. These steps in Deptford are probably where Peter, the Tsar of Russia, came ashore. Upper Watergate steps in Deptford are steeped in history. It is here reputedly Nelson, when he died, when he was dead, his body, pickled in a barrel of rum, been rolled up these steps. Here, so they say, was where Sir Walter Raleigh took off his cloak and threw it over a puddle so Queen Elizabeth wouldn't get her tootsies wet. And just think, Peter the Great of Russia, up these steps in Deptford. He stayed 4 months, did Peter, and it was his time in South London where he learnt enough to go back to Russia and build for them a new formidable navy. Until recently, there was nothing here in Deptford to remind us of these events. But now a composition's been erected here on the spot of what was the Royal Naval Dockyard, and
Here he is, Peter of Russia.
the centrepiece of this composition that stands on a pedestal of granite about 1 metre high. Peter wears a tricorn hat, three-pointed hat, holds the telescope, Nelson-like, and a pipe of, I would think, Dutch tobacco. Next to him is a dwarf, and the dwarf holds in his right hand a boat, Peter the sailor. And in his left hand did have a globe last time I was here, but the globe's been nicked, vandalised, pulled off. It's a shocking thing. If anybody knows anything about it, bring it back. It was important, that globe. And round the back is a flagon of vodka. Won't be able to nick that quite so easily. And here's the chair. Isn't it lovely? You can sit here, look out, our gateway to the world down there, the estuary of the Thames, touch Peter's coat, and all the way round are little reliefs and scenes that show what his life was, the significance of it for Russia and for us.
Peter the Great actually, and surprisingly perhaps, was a rather shy man, being of great height, about 6'7". All courts in Europe at that time, they were having jesters or dwarfs. Therefore, the dwarf traveled with Peter the Great when he was traveling in Europe. He holds in one hand a globe, which is explaining the idea of Peter the Great to travel, to learn how to build a navy for Russia, and thus taking Russia into the fold of the global community.
He was a Russian. Russians had never gone out of Russia before. He was the first Tsar to leave. He could build ships in his sleep, but he came to Deptford because here was the leading edge in ship design and all things seafaring. He said to somebody in Deptford, "Give me a design for a ship that I can take to one of my men on the River Don that's never seen the sea, and he'll be able to build me that ship."
The statue was sculpted by Mikhail Chemyakin, famous Russian sculptor, who did all the work for free, even provided the materials, because of his respect for the great man Peter, who was, in his time, sometimes a bit of a lad.
They called it being a hellraiser. He did the sort of things that, well, modern pop stars have done in London hotels.
When Peter the Great came to England in 1698, he lived at Sayes Court at Deptford. Unfortunately, he wasn't the best house guest, and he managed to trash Sayes Court, and the bill came to over £350, and the king had to pick up the bill. He also came to Greenwich on 4 occasions. He visited the Royal Observatory and visited John Flamsteed, the Astronomer Royal. But again, he wasn't the best guest, and he managed to trash chairs, windows, locks, the whole lot, and the king also had to pick up the bill there.
But he left a good legacy, this Peter, with the educational trust in his name that encourages young people to be global and to have a spirit of adventure.
At the statue's unveiling by Prince Michael of Kent with the Russian ambassador, children helped by the educational trust were there, often kids with disabilities, encouraged by what Peter said to himself when he came to Deptford. You can do it. Yes, you can.
We want to incarnate Peter's spirit, a spirit that would not be overcome by massive difficulties. We wanted to root that in this day and this age and in this town.
And that's what statues are for, to remind us someone has been there, done it, tried to. Now it's our turn. As Peter the Great said himself, you can only make ideas live by making them happen. In the world's history, one of the men of the 20th century has to be Nelson Mandela. And there's a bust of Nelson Mandela in London by the Festival Hall on the South Bank. It was put up in 1985 and is said to be a gift from the people of Britain to the liberated people of South Africa. The sculptor was Ian Walters. Why did you make the head on that statue so very big?
Well, in conjunction with the ANC in this country, we decided that a large sculptural head, which could be taken easily to political meetings, would provide focus and make people aware of the outrage of apartheid.
Ian Walters' statue of Nelson Mandela played an invaluable role in bringing his cause to the people of Britain. I remember the first occasion when Ian produced this huge maquette at a concert out in Alexandra Palace, and it dominated the whole event, and people were just inspired that they must do something to try and secure Mandela's release. One of the people there was Jerry Dammers, and he went away and produced Free Nelson Mandela, which got into the charts. So millions of people across the country for the first time heard about Nelson Mandela and his cause.
So it was carted around the country from place to place?
Oh yes, yes. In fact, if we designed it actually to fit a Ford Escort van with about 1 inch clearance all the way around, so it could be slid in and out. And of course it was made of fiberglass, which was relatively light. I knew that it was likely to be damaged by the fascist elements in our society. Putting a black man in a public place was about the only time when a black man has gone up in sculpture in this country. It was bound to get attacked. Fortunately, I knew it was going to get damaged, so I'd made a mould for it. But of course, you couldn't do anything when it was burnt down, so the whole thing had to be recast in bronze.
Nelson Mandela is a remarkable man, it seems to me, in our time. It's very important that we are reminded that there are such human beings on earth. 27 years in prison and forgiving those who put you in prison immediately is a very remarkable example.
While Nelson Mandela was in prison on Robben Island, many of us came here, outside South Africa House. Day and night, protesters bore witness with dignity and steadfastness, praying that the struggle would force change.
The British people played an amazing role in the anti-apartheid movement, on the boycott of South African goods, on the arms embargo, on the sports campaign, all intended to isolate South Africa.
We can say that the British people played a fantastic, marvelous role in this process. And in a sense, they were the agents of change in this country, in solidarity with South Africa.
The point about apartheid was its nasty form of racist tyranny infected the whole of the sports system, from school level to national level. Every sport was affected. Virtually every sport, save for individual sportsmen and women in tennis and golf, it was much more difficult to stop them. And so we targeted their national teams on everything from badminton to rugby. Sport is so fanatically followed amongst white South Africans, and I was a white South African myself, I knew that. So if we could hit their sport, we could make a big dent in apartheid.
Being someone in the forefront of politics, a black woman in the forefront of politics then, obviously you couldn't help being involved in this issue. At the time there were sanctions being brought in by the UN and different European governments. What I felt was an extension of that was for someone like myself to become involved, like for instance, standing outside Tesco's with some friends and colleagues, trying to boycott the purchase of South African produce, in particular Cape grapes.
The sports boycott had a massive impact. It was the one thing that really changed. You could try and impose trade sanctions, you could try and impose an arms embargo, but these things were subject to global forces that you couldn't control. We could stop the sport. We did. And it had a huge impact on a fanatical white community.
The anti-apartheid movement grew strong in this country, while back in South Africa, many struggled and died, believing and preparing and working for the day that would surely dawn when apartheid would be no more.
My aunt, Helen Suzman, took a very particular interest in prisons during her tenure in Parliament. She met Nelson Mandela first through the bars of the hole in his door. They shook hands. How do you do, Mr. Mandela? How do you do, Mrs. Suzman? How are the conditions here? He said, well, there is a warder with a swastika tattooed on the back of his fist, and he's very troublesome. And within 2 weeks, that warder, who was a Nazi, had disappeared due to Helen's intervention. It was she who insisted that they should be allowed to take undergraduate courses. So eventually it was called the University of Robben Island. She insisted that the prisoners should be allowed newspapers so they could keep up with world events.
Nelson Mandela told me when he was released from jail that the news of our protests had come through almost daily. It gave them a tremendous lift.
Since his release in 1990, Nelson Mandela has taken opportunities to thank the British people for their support.
I would like to put each and every one of you in my pocket and to return with you to South Africa.
I think it's fitting that in proposed changes to Trafalgar Square, focus of Britain's anti-apartheid effort, there should be a site for a new statue to the great man.
The bust I made of Mandela belongs to the period in which he was in prison and helped to achieve his freedom. What is now needed is a sculpture for Trafalgar Square, a sculpture on the new terrace. This is the maquette for it. It's a small study for the statue, which would be about 9 feet high. Its democratic gesture will, I think, express Mandela's influence for world peace.
I am happy to be in Trafalgar Square, where one of the most important battles of liberating South Africa was fought right here.
I do strongly think there should be a statue. It should be in Trafalgar Square. He would be looking down into the square and in direct line with Nelson at the top of his column. So you have this wonderful symbolism, two Nelsons. The particular significance for Nelson Mandela is, of course, at the time he was born, he was a citizen of the British Empire. Trafalgar Square really is the centre of that empire. His life seems like a transition to a completely new world in just, a few decades.
The man who we're going to honour is a man of peace. And in a way, all the figures in Trafalgar Square are admirals and generals and people who have done great service to the country, but are involved in confrontation and war.
But it also has to be a symbol for our children, to let them know that no race should ever oppress another.
I can't think of anyone who would grace Trafalgar Square more suitably than Nelson Mandela.
I'd love to see a statue of Nelson Mandela in Trafalgar Square because nobody is more respected in international politics, worshipped in a way, than him.
We can be sure the great man will, with wry, dignified humility, be pleased to get a statue in the square. It'd be an inspiration for peace and for dignity in struggle, but we shall see. Because, as I've said, to get a statue put up does take some effort.
The Mandela statue will be paid for by public and private donation. To an enormous degree, it's from all sorts of schools and organisations and town and city councils who've got Mandela Square, Mandela Street, who all want to recognise that here is one of the most remarkable men that's lived in the last 100 years. And I think there will be thousands of people who wish to say, yes, here's my pound note, here's my £10, or there may be some people, I hope, with nice big heavy cheques. And the government, I'm sure, will back it.
But one of the most popular, I'd say the most popular of London statues, is not to a hero who ever lived, but to the boy who wouldn't grow up. To Peter Pan, a figment of imagination. It was sculpted by George Frampton in 1911 in an Art Nouveau style, and it stands on the west bank of the Long Water in Kensington Gardens. The statue was commissioned by the writer of Peter Pan himself, J.M. Barrie, and it appeared here as if by magic overnight in a royal park. No planning permission sought, no debate about whether it should be here, it was just here. Oh, there was such a kerfuffle when it was found out to be here. Questions asked in Parliament. It nearly had to be removed, but by public demand, protocol was broken, and here it is, now highly polished, from being touched by the hands of so many fans. We do love Peter Pan. This statue is now as popular as the play and pantomime, because the idea of Peter Pan, the boy who didn't grow up, of being forever young, is so strong, so alive in the hearts and dreams of all of us, young and old, forever.